Today on IIN, we watch another episode of our new documentary series, Micropolis, visiting the smaller settlements of the Empire. In this series, we will look at hamlets, villages, and towns all over the settled planets, from the core world to Akhinnae Prime.
In the last episode, we visited Micropolis, a city high up in the Gautis Mountains at the center of the Empire. For this episode, we have left the mountains and taken the train south into the Akhinnae province. The last 3 hours of our journey are by airship, taking us to Ironwing, a city located in Delitas Bay on the Southern Sea, not far from the Noiklet province. Ironwing is the largest city we will visit in this series, with a current population of around 121,000 inhabitants. Like all wing harbors, Ironwing is a planned city, founded during the Unification Wars. Built in an otherwise remote and difficult-to-access location, and heavily fortified, Ironwing was financed, designed, and constructed primarily by houses Arundel, Sarek, and Akhinnae. Like all wing cities, Ironwing is a bastion city, featuring massive, fortified city walls, whose ancient artillery pieces are still maintained today. Since the forces of the Karlim Republic consisted largely of infantry and cavalry armies, the rebel forces under the leadership of Mianira Fayal shifted their focus primarily to naval warfare. In great haste and under strict secrecy, fortified harbor cities were constructed along the coast of the central continent. These cities served as shipyards where vessels were built and outfitted, allowing small relief armies to bypass enemy land forces and strike behind their lines. Ironwing itself was established between 34 and 29 years before the unification, though significant expansions were added over the next 11 years. In Ironwing, houses Sarek and Akhinnae quickly found new ways to efficiently supply resources for the construction of a new type of warship, the ironclad warship. One such innovation was the first elevated railway on the continent, called the Iron Line. Its tracks still connect all districts of the city, and it was originally designed to transport workers to the shipyards every morning. Even today, the earliest surviving train car model, the FS-41 from the 3rd century after the unification, is still in operation. Another important transport system is the city's canal network. Ironwing was built deep into the bay and has approximately 40 kilometers of canals. Originally, these waterways were used to transport resources from ships to factories. Today, they primarily serve as public transportation routes. One of these canals leads us to the city's historic shipyard district, which now serves as a museum. Here, 2 preserved docks, along with their original factories and warehouses, remain intact. Visitors can also tour the legendary SD Akhinnae, the last fully preserved ironclad warship of the Unitas class that saw action in the Unification War. The Unitas class, powered by sails and an early revolutionary propeller drive, transported House Sarek's Marines and mobile artillery across nearly all theaters of war for 10 years. It later led the fleet squadron that severely damaged the Republic's main fleet in the naval battle of Ilhet in 12 years before the unification, capturing some of its most important admirals. The cramped conditions aboard the Akhinnae offer a glimpse into the hardships endured by up to 500 Marines, who often had to endure several cycles aboard these ironclad warships.
To build the ironclads, immense production capacities were required. Directly adjacent to the old shipyard district is the industrial district, where blast furnaces, rolling mills, and workshops were operated by over 20,000 hastily recruited specialists. Most of these workers were war-wounded or displaced members of all houses, granted to House Akhinnae and House Sarek to provide them with shelter during the war. One of the steel works is still in operation today for tourism purposes and is part of the city's many museums. The blast furnace of Steel Factory 12 could produce 10 tons of steel per year. Shortly after the war, the environmentally harmful blast furnaces were replaced with arc furnaces, which produced steel with significantly lower emissions. The coal and wood furnaces used during wartime were also gradually replaced with eco-friendly alternatives throughout the city. Inspired by the enormous forces exerted by the 5 tides crashing against the city's dock walls, Legate Olesia Benis of House Ripajut developed the first tidal power plants in Ironwing during the 5th century. Today, 4 modern tidal power plants stand at the city's outskirts, not only generating energy from the tides, but also storing it by channeling water into massive pumped storage reservoirs. With these reserves, the city can store up to 3,000 megathran of energy per year. Even more modern than the tidal power plants are the advanced shipyards of House Sarek, which still operates a military shipyard here, primarily designing and testing experimental ship types for colonial deployment. Access to this facility is naturally restricted for security reasons, so we head instead to the neighboring Institute for Marine Research, operated by Houses Likoran, Erinyenhet, and Nevis. This institute conducts fundamental research on the oceans of Akhinnae and its colonies. Each year, nearly 1,000 scientists are deployed from here in small teams to explore the oceans of every planet in the Empire that has large bodies of water. The relatively high population of Ironwing is also due to the fact that the first high-rise buildings in the planet's history were constructed here. In particular, the Cliantes and Octores were housed in these buildings to accommodate as many workers as possible near production sites. Many housing concepts that are now standard for the lower classes originated here, such as communal kitchens, integrated medical facilities, and shared house gardens, all designed to compensate for the perceived cramped living conditions. At the city's centre lies the densely built Pillar District, where highly defensive architecture is evident in the low, sturdy buildings. The Magistrates' Hall, located next to the Hall of the Houses, was designed as a last stronghold in case of direct siege. However, while the city was never stormed, its walls were besieged. In the year 10 before the unification, 3 battalions of the Republican Punitive Expedition laid siege to Ironwing, hoping to prevent the completion of more ironclads, which had already inflicted devastating naval defeats. The city's fortifications were reinforced by hastily transported ship cannons, as the garrison itself consisted of only about 2,000 soldiers. However, a skirmisher unit from House Miswell managed to break the siege after a tertial, as the bombardment-weakened Republican forces lacked the strength to repel the attack from their rear. Thus, our visit to Ironwing comes to an end. Before leaving, we stop by one of the famous shipyard taverns, where we enjoy a glass of stone wine and an almond, honey-crusted salt salmon, a local delicacy. Afterward, we take the last airship of the day to reach the orbital elevator, where we will depart the planet. Our next destination is the oldest settlement beyond the core system, the Gotus system, named after the mountain, home to an icy planet where nearly 200 years ago, Akhinnae settlers founded their first city, Oki.